Welcome back everybody to the third in a series of videos that I've put together to explain the final project to you and what I'm expecting you to complete. To this point, what we've done is we talked about the title slide and how you would introduce yourself in your presentation and give a little bit of background about the intervention in the next slide. And then what I had you do, and I've already done this third slide for you, this is the change in pedestrian stops from before to during the patrols, separated by target area and comparison area. What you'll end up doing is coming up with these numbers for vehicle stops, arrests, and violent crime. So you'll have to update these in your PowerPoint. And in terms of your presentation, after you talk about the intervention itself, this is where you would pivot to discussing what the officers did. So I would suggest that when you've talked about the intervention itself sufficiently, you kind of pivot a little and say, so in terms of what the officers did, what we found was that, and so on and so on. So talk about the pedestrian stop trends in the treatment areas and target areas. And when this is an actual slideshow, you'll be using either a clicker or your keyboard to progress to the next slide. And so when you progress to this slide, what you'll see is that it's going to automatically populate for you. And when that happens, you should be discussing, well, in the target areas, we found that before the intervention in both the target and comparison areas, we had 118 pedestrian stops that were conducted. If we look at these trends over time, we found that in the areas where officers were on foot, proactively policing, those pedestrian stops went up to 151. However, in the comparison area, we saw a decline in pedestrian stops from 118 to 107. And that's really all you need to say for each of these slides, right? So just discuss the trends in terms of what happened in the targeted areas and the comparison areas for each of these slides. And remember that what we're doing here is we're discussing outputs. So we're saying that this is what the officers did, and then once we get to the point where we're looking at what happened in terms of violent crime, we could say that all of these things coincided with, and we're going to have a reduction in crime in the target areas compared to the controls. Right, but before you get to that, we've got another slide that I'm going to have you fill out. And so here, what you're going to essentially do is just kind of give a little bit of a recap about what you discussed here in your slides that have the different line charts. And I filled this first one in for you. So I've got a table for outputs and I've got a table for outcome. So what you're going to do here is you're going to discuss the trends in these different variables: ped stops, traffic stops, arrests, and we don't have detected drug activity, so I'll delete that. This won't be in your table, but I'm just going to focus on the pedestrian stops. And so what I did was I calculated percentage change in the targeted areas, in the treatment areas, from before to during the intervention. So you're going to have to do this for traffic stops and arrests. As well, you're not going to have to do it for violent crime because you've done this with the weighted displacement calculator already, so you can just enter that result here. So important things to point out: we're not making comparisons now to the comparison areas. We're just talking about the treatment areas. And so when I say the output of pedestrian stops, we see an increase of 61% in the targeted areas. That's because we started off with 118 in the targeted area and we ended up with 151 during the intervention. And so what this represents when I calculate that percentage change is an increase of 61% in pedestrian stops in the treatment area. Right, so for this part of the presentation, you're going to essentially ignore the comparison areas. Right, so you'll calculate percentage change, and we did this for the midterm project. We did this way at the beginning of the semester. A little hint: there's all sorts of percentage change calculators that are online that you can access for free, so you could feel free to do that as well. All right, so you'll be filling in here. So I want to know whether there were increases or decreases in these different outputs during the intervention period in the targeted areas. Then what we're going to do, is talk about the outcome. And I'm going to delete this because we're not going to be talking about vehicle-related crime. Just going to be interested in violent crime. And so here you don't have to calculate the percentage change. What I want you to report is what the weighted displacement quotient calculator gave you. Right? So in terms of violent crime in the target areas, what happened? Right? And it did decrease by what percent? So you'll calculate that or fill this in from the calculator. Right, so with this screen up, what you would do, and I think I said this already, is just kind of recap. Right? Recap what you discuss here. And so how I would frame this, and I think I did last week, is I'd first talk about the outputs. I'd say, so in other words, what we saw was an increase in pedestrian stops by 61%, an increase in traffic stops by X percent, whatever that is. Talk about arrests and then drug activity. And then what I would say is that all of these activities coincided with a reduction or decrease in violent crime by X percent. So essentially in this slide, what you're going to convey to your audience is that there appears to be a positive benefit of this intervention. Right, so we had the targeted areas outperform the control areas, not only in violent crime, but in terms of our outputs as well. And so it appears that this is a successful intervention in terms of crime reduction. And then I would go to your kind of last slide, really, before your conclusion slide, and I would talk about the weighted displacement quotient. And so what you're going to have to do with this slide 8 here is you're going to have to enter the weighted displacement quotient value and fill in the information that I've got here marked as X's. And this is all, again, information that you'll find from the weighted displacement quotient results. So with this slide, what I would do is talk briefly about, when you're giving your presentation, is talk briefly about what a weighted displacement quotient is, how you calculated it, right? Where did the data come from? And again, you don't have to get very specific here, but say this came from official records for the police department. We use the weighted displacement quotient calculator to calculate the weighted displacement quotient as well as the total net effect and crime displacement. So, and these are the findings. And I would focus most on the total net effect, right? Because this is actually going to quantify for you the amount of crimes that were prevented as a result of the intervention. So this is going to be what's most interesting to police commanders. Also want to talk about displacement. So in your presentation, I might introduce the audience to the concept of crime displacement. Even if they're not able to vocalize the term displacement, police commanders are going to have an idea of what you're talking about crime simply moving around the corner. Still, it's worthwhile, especially if you could assume that this is your first presentation to these police commanders, it's worthwhile to briefly discuss crime displacement, also briefly discuss diffusion of crime control benefits, and then talk about the results from the weighted displacement quotient calculator in terms of displacement. Right, so this will also kind of be a summary of the overall intervention. Right, so you'll kind of bring people back, and really what you want to drive home is that this is successful, and as a result of this intervention we prevented X violent crimes from occurring. And after you've done that, I've added here a conclusion slide, and here I would just walk back over what you've done. Right, so find a way to succinctly say, this is what we did for the intervention, these are the outputs. Overall, this resulted in a reduction in violent crime by X percent, a total net effect of X number of crimes being prevented. And so what we can conclude is that this type of intervention, where we take officers out of cars and put them on foot, except for one pair, this is a successful way that we can prevent crime moving forward in the Nicetown Police Department. Alright, so if you want to have bullet points here, you could do that to help jog your memory. If you want to just have pictures here or some other creative way, and you practice enough that you can recall what your conclusions are, that would be the best kind of option in my opinion. Right, and so that's what I'm looking for. That is your final project. So this is not going to be very time intensive. I think the most time intensive aspect is going to be practicing your presentation so that you can deliver it effectively. And so this is going to be due in 1 week. So that'll be on the 12th. All right, so we're going to upload the video that you create to Blackboard. And that is what I'm going to use to give you your grade. All right, so again, this is going to be about a 10-minute presentation. If you go under a little bit or over a little bit, that's fine, but shoot for about 10 minutes. And that's what I'm going to grade you on. Right, so it's going to be the professionalism with which you present the results, as well as I'm going to make sure you have the right answers as well. As I said, if you want to do this as a voiceover, which a voiceover would be what I'm doing right now, I've got the PowerPoint slide up and I'm speaking into a microphone and discussing this intervention. You could do that. As I mentioned, free software out there is called FreeCam. That's what I'm using here. It's pretty easy once you get used to it. Another option, and I'd kind of prefer this, but another option is that you can record yourself using your phones or an iPad or whatever you've got. Maybe you've got a computer screen up in front of you and you're standing in front of this computer screen and you're talking about the results, so you're going through your presentation. In terms of giving you feedback, doing this by recording yourself is probably best, because not only can I talk to you about what you're saying, but also about your body language and how you come off in terms of your presentation. But again, I'm not requiring that you do that. Right, so this is going to be the end of the presentation for today, the end of the lecture. Going to put a discussion board link up if you've got questions about the final project. As I said, this is going to be due next Tuesday. What I'll say is that I want this to be handed in by Tuesday at 5:00 p.m. Right, so that would be the end of our normal class period. Just keep in mind that final grades are due for this semester on May 15th. So you really have to get it in by next Tuesday, right? Because that's only going to give me a couple days to grade these. Everything else is up to date, but I've got to go through each of your videos. If there's other work that we've made an arrangement with, right, past exercises, that also is going to have to be done and uploaded by next Tuesday at 5 p.m. Right? Because again, final grades due on the 15th. I'm going to need time to grade them. I usually like to leave grades up for a day so that you can have a look, and if you've got any concerns, or if I didn't enter grade properly, that I can change that before I submit the final grades. So please get this done by the 12th so we avoid any snafus. All right, so good luck. As I said, if you've got questions, feel free to post them in the discussion board link for the final project. If you need me, feel free to email me as well. And that's it. So I'll end this video here, and good luck.